10,000 BCE is generally accepted as the start of the period that would become known as the agricultural and Neolithic revolutions. We had already started to eat grains, collecting the seed by hand plucking, but now, with more purposeful cultivation and harvesting with our hands and sickle-like stones, a new era of human existence had begun. Trust me when I say that there is so much to explain about the origin of agriculture that archaeology classes typically spend between 2 days to a week to weeks discussing it in different locations. I'm not going to spend that much time as a talking head. Instead, what I would most like people to keep in mind is when the tool first appeared in life, whether it even appears in the mythology, and how it appears in art. Hi, my name is Renee, you're listening to Detours in Archaeology, and this is Slice of Life. Artifacts with curved blades were used to harvest stocky plants. The earliest one-handed ones have been found at some of the earliest ancient sites around the world, including in Africa, the Fertile Crescent, India, and China. And everyday staple foods across these ancient areas still included and still include grains and cereals such as wheat, barley, millet, and rice. Earlier examples may have existed in mid and southern Africa since grains were a staple crop there too. However, archaeologists still haven't yet found the tools in excavations. This is mainly due to a lack of preservation in organic substances that are that old, or even just finding the tools without them being destroyed in the meantime. In the Bronze and Iron Ages, sickles were, as the name suggests, made out of metals. Before smelting, however, it was commonplace for sickles to be made of flint, bone, clay, or wood with a wooden or bone handle, and sometimes had serrated teeth of bone, flint, and obsidian. Many of the earliest sickles found looked to be the serrated versions, as it made it easier for cutting since the base was wood, clay, or bone. These examples have been found in the region of Mesopotamia, the Levant, Africa, the Americas, and in Asia. So, pretty much everywhere. Then, as technology advanced, the clean, sharp-edged variations would have been made out of stone and then of metals, bronze, iron, and eventually steel. There are examples from the Tahunan culture found in the Nahal Hemar cave, which is now in the Israel Museum, made circa 7000 BCE of flint and resin. There are wood sickles with flints from the 18th dynasty in Egypt. Several kinds of sickles were used in the Neolithic period in Southwest Asia. There are obsidian sickles found from Teotihuacan in Mexico, probably for harvesting maize. And we still have the modern harvesting sickle. The two-handed scythe came later, the larger tool or weapon that we commonly associate with death. This tool made harvesting faster, just like the sickle had done initially. There is evidence that the scythe existed as early as 5000 BCE based on the finds from the Cucuteni-Trepitia settlements in Romania, Central Europe. The ancient Scythians grew hemp and harvested it with a hand reaper or a scythe. Scythes weren't really seen to replace sickles in farming until the 16th century, but the earlier scythes were still thought to mow down the fields faster than sickles would. Perhaps the smaller tool was just too beneficial in too many circumstances to be replaced entirely. The ceiling from the studio, the private study of the Medici Palace in Florence, and apart from the famous Chapel of the Magi by Benozzo Gozzoli, it's the only element of the palace's magnificent interior to have survived still in situ, and was created for Piero de' Medici in the 1450s. The ceiling is by the sculptor Luca del Robina and consists of the 12 roundels, basically round plates depicting the labors of the 12 months of the year. It employs the technique of tin-glazed terracotta developed by della Robina around 1430 for architectural sculpture. Unlike popular della Robina relief structures, these roundels boast naturalistic paintings in shades of white and blue, colors achieved through an experimental method seldom replicated. The edges of each roundels are adorned with sculpted leaf patterns, subtly detailed in low relief, offering a textural contrast to the smooth painted centers. Getting back to the actual tool, the word falx, which originally meant sickle. But as technology changed, its meaning came to encompass any tool or weapon with a curved blade. As it was used in Latin, the sickle was falx mazoria, and the scythe was falx fonaria. The falx tool was later used as a weapon and described in Ovid's Metamorphoses as more of a falcata, which in itself in Italian means stride. But its full Latin name was ensis falcatus, a curved sword from pre-Roman Iberia. A Roman monument commemorating the Battle of Adamclisi clearly shows Deccan warriors wielding two-handed falx rhomphaia, another example of the tool being turned into a weapon. Other variations also became weapons in different countries, and a list includes, but are certainly not limited to, the kama from Japan and other areas of Southeast Asia, the jiwa lian, or chicken sickle, from China, the kopesh from Egypt, the shotel in Ethiopia, the mambele from mid to southern Africa, and the Congolese sickle or trembash. Even though these tools had been converted to weapons, they still continue to be used as farming equipment. And speaking of farming equipment and weapons, a common one that is a little bit of both is the kopesh. The kopesh, originating from Western Asia, particularly Mesopotamia, is the very famous sickle-shaped sword that was adopted and adapted by the Egyptians, who transformed it from a type of curved blade axe into a distinctive weapon favored in both warfare and ceremony, and still work. Characterized by its pronounced curve and its sharp inner and outer edges, the blade's form echoed the agricultural sickle even as it served martial purposes, and its visual impact made it ideally suited to symbolic use. In Egyptian art, the sword became closely associated with pharaonic authority, their military prowess, and the divine right to rule, appearing repeatedly in statues, reliefs, and murals as the emblem of power to all who would see them. Its name might derive from the Egyptian word meaning knee or leg, a possible linguistic reference to the ox leg historically used in sacred offerings, and also sometimes a weapon, linking the weapon not only to combat and rulership, but also to ritual practice and the broader symbolic language of life, sustenance, and sovereignty. In Egyptian mythology and culture, the sickle was of course used for agriculture, harvesting grain for daily bread or beer, and for the afterlife subsistence. And it symbolized fertility with the growth of agriculture, royal power, and protection, appearing as a ceremonial tool for pharaohs, especially during festivals, and was a tool for gods like Horus and Set. It also connects the kopesh to the kings when they use them in festivals and rituals because it symbolizes power. Agriculture was central to Egyptian life, living along the Nile, providing the staple grains that underpinned daily sustenance and the production of bread and beer, the dietary cornerstones of ancient society. Wooden sickles fitted with flint blades as common agricultural tools also found a place in funerary practice. They were placed in the tombs and painted on tomb walls in the hands of their afterlife servants so that the deceased might continue to harvest divine crops in the afterlife, or to use them as protective implements to ward off hostile spirits. As objects and motifs, sickles carried a rich symbolic weight, invoking the cyclical rhythms of life and death, the renewal of the harvest, and the promise of abundance. This symbolism is reflected in the artistic and religious imagery, where deities such as Horus are sometimes portrayed as the role of the reaper, linking royal, as the pharaoh is the living embodiment of Horus, and cosmic order to the fecundity of the land. Ornate sickles like those found in Tutankhamun's tomb, made of gilded wood with glass blades, would have been commonly used in festivals like Puret and as symbols of royal duty, linking kings to agricultural prosperity. Puret or Poryet was the growing or planting season that typically took place between November and March as the second of the 3 agricultural seasons. It was after Akhet, the inundation or flooding season, during summer, and before Shamu, the harvest or low water season, going from later spring to summer. And Puret means the season of emergence. Also called the black season, when the Nile's floodwaters receded, it left a black fertile silt that the farmers plowed and sowed seeds in, like wheat, barley, flax, and vegetables for the growing season, focusing on nurturing new life from the enriched land, which is definitely something that people would want to celebrate, especially if the flooding didn't last either for too short a time or too long a time, and they'd be grateful to the gods and the pharaoh for, since it was part of his divine duties to keep the land running in its proper cycles. The godly aspect comes in with Horus depicted as the divine husbandman, holding a sickle to symbolize his power over germination and the harvest. Some people think that another deity possibly associated with the festival of Puret and the beginning of the planting season was the goddess Satis, the consort of Akum, the goddess of the flood. But on doing research, I couldn't find any direct connections between them. Additionally, a sickle-like object or tool might have been associated with the god Set, a god of disorder and tricksterism, which may have been used in conflict or ritual, though Set is more known for his battling Apep in the older periods of ancient Egypt. Listen to my episode on Set for more information on him, and I'll link that in the description. There are several myths that the sickle itself appears in. Many of these myths are contradictory and difficult to sort out, so I'm telling the versions that I enjoy. If Western mythology can't say anything, we can say that we tend to emulate older cultural traditions that are deemed worthy. Not automatically a bad or harmful thing, this can help us trace our roots and the roots of everyday things that we use. Going back into the deep past, one of the longest through lines, possibly, begins with the story of Gaia, her son/husband Uranos, not Uranus, and their son Kronos from ancient Greece, and based on the name's etymology, possibly its predecessors. Starting with Gaia, the primordial iteration of the earth, and Uranos, the sky, had a heap of children, with the youngest being Kronos, with a C or a K, spelled differently depending what time you're writing it and where. He was the Titan god of the harvest, and is a marker of time passing, changing seasons, and the yearly reaping. The short version goes as such. After Gaia created her husband Uranos, fearing that he would be supplanted by one of his children, he ate the ones that would become known as the Titans after locking up the more monstrous of his and Gaia's children. Gaia, obviously, wasn't too happy about this, so she created the harp, and that's with an E at the end, a combination sword sickle, or more traditionally a sickle made out of either flint or gray adamantine, diamond, for Kronos to castrate and possibly kill his father to save his siblings. Short story shorter, he did. Uranos was sliced apart after being castrated, and Kronos then threw them into the sea behind him, and with them he also threw away the sickle at Cape Drepanum, according to Hesiod. And there is plenty of artworks, frescoes, and later depicting this lovely story. Well, once Uranos was out of the way, Kronos became the ruler of the Titan Age, And he also learned from Gaia that just like Uranus, one of his children would overtake him, and when they were born, he ate them one by one. No one was happy about Kronos eating his and Rhea's children, who was another goddess. And these children were the first generation of the Greek Golden Age gods, either whole or in pieces. So, after Rhea gave birth to her youngest son Zeus on the island of Crete, she gave Cronus the Omphalos stone, which he promptly swallowed. And after growing up in Gaia's care, and sometimes in mythology, a goat, Zeus came back with an emetic, a vomit-inducing poison, that either Metis or Gaia gave him, which made Kronos throw up all his siblings and the stone. With the aid of his siblings, 3 Cyclopes, and the Hecatoncheires, Zeus's team was able to defeat Kronos and throw him into Tartarus. This brought about the generation of the gods, the Olympian Age. It's not clear whether this particular sickle ends up being the same weapon that was given to Perseus by Hermes when he went to kill Medusa, but it seems like an interesting continuation, especially because Gaia made the blade to kill monstrous beings. If it was the same one, it was either thrown away by Kronos after defeating Uranus, or it was perhaps taken away after Kronos was defeated. Also, as these take place in a mythical setting, timing isn't specifically defined, so other than the generational changes, we're not really sure which events were taking place in which order. The story of Perseus, however, did take place during the Olympian Age, as evidenced by the appearance of Hermes and Hera. Zeus also used his adamantine sickle to fight Typhon, one of the Titans born of Gaia, who was supposed to supplant Zeus, which didn't work out well for him at first. Translated from the Apollodorus, Zeus pelted Typhon at a distance with thunderbolts, and when they were close, the god struck him down with an adamantine sickle. However, Typhon wrestled the sickle from him, severed the sinews of his hands and feet, and lifted him up on his shoulders, carrying him through the sea to Cilicia in Asia Minor, and deposited him on arrival inside the Corinthian cave. Even before the later ties to the monster slaying, the sickle that Gaia created was known as a divine weapon. It may have been indestructible with divine magic for divine slaying and essence scattering. With the hoops that have seemingly had to be jumped through for the ability to kill a god, it seems like only something that Gaia created can destroy something Gaia created, which also seems to tie to the idea of homeopathy. That's a whole other story. Side note, I find it interesting that it's the youngest child that does the saving. Sure, it doesn't always end really well for them, but still, it is a very common thing throughout folklore as well. Like you have Russian folklore with Baba Yaga, you got the Billy Goat's Gruff, it's always the last one that actually solved it. But that's also the rule of 3, so there you go. If you're youngest of 2, I guess you're... But because Greece and Rome loved to consolidate gods internally and with any outside groups that they connected with or conquered, researchers see their favorite gods being combined with others. Most of these gods only have slight connections based on what they rule over or represent and or who their parents were. They aren't all depicted with a sickle tool, so I'll move along as quickly as possible. Classic authors often compare the Greek version of Kronos to the Roman Saturn. Like his Greek equivalent, Saturn, or Saturnus in Latin, was the ruler of the gods during the Golden or Titan Age. Varro, in De Lingua Latina, says that the name Saturnus came from satis, meaning sowing. But even if this isn't etymologically connected to the Titan's name, the meaning still does. He was worshipped as a Titan of capital, wealth, agriculture, liberation, and time. And yes, this is the Saturnus that the holiday Saturnalia celebrates, wherein slaves are made citizens, if only for a short time, and everyone drinks a lot. So to the Romans, it only made sense to conflate him with the Greek god of the harvest and even to the Orphic Greek god Kronos, but I'll talk about him a little bit later. Also, he is one of two versions actually shown holding a sickle. The other is from the Hurrian. In Egypt, the god of the earth, Geb, was also the god of vegetation, fertility, earthquakes, and is the father of snakes. The name for snakes was Set-tet, maybe son of the earth, from their coffin lids. Geb, Seb, or Keb was often signified with the snake head or a goose. The snake was also one of Kronos' symbols, which also includes grain, a sickle, and a scythe. This flips the roles. Males and females played in the creation myths, Geb as earth and Nut as sky, rather than Gaia as earth and Uranus as sky. In Mesopotamia, Elil was worshipped by the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and Hurrians. He was the god of wind, air, earth, and storms. He was worshipped in Sumer as more of a king of all the other gods, a creator, and as a benevolent fatherly deity who watches over humanity and cares for their well-being. This doesn't really match with how the Greeks saw or worshipped Cronus, but he created a farming tool, though it is described more as a pickaxe or a hoe, although still used. Specifically in Hurrian mythology, so Hittites, we have Kurambi. In the Song of Kurambi, the title character bites off his own genitals and spits out semen, creating three new gods. The weather god Tasub was cut out of Kurambi, making him Kurambi's son, and it is he who overthrows him. Upon reading the stories of the Song of Kurambi, aka Kingship in Heaven tablets, scholars point out the similarities to the stories about Cronus, mainly the severing of his genitals and creating gods from it, because in Greece, Aphrodite was also said to have been born of his severed genitals, which gives a whole new look at sea foam. Also, in the Song of Ulikumi, Teshub uses the, quote, sickle with which heaven and earth had once been separated, unquote, to defeat the monster Ulikumi, establishing that the castration of the heavens by means of a sickle was part of another creation myth. The origin was that a cut creating an opening or gap between heaven, imagined as a dome of stone, and earth, enabling the beginning of time, Chronos, which ties to its Latinate history and the earlier Greek mythology. Ugarishan, or Canaanite, had El, or Eel. In the Sanchuniathon, the Philo of Byblos, aka Herennius Philon, a Phoenician historian who lived in ancient Greece in 64 to 141 CE, El, or Elis, is the son of the earth and sky, hence Kronos. But other than the combination to the star Saturn, that's where the similarities end. This is also made more complex because the only reason we have the Sanchuniathon is notes by Eusebius of Caesarea, a Greek Christian who lived around 260 to 340 CE, who combined all of this with the Bible history too, though I'm not certain if it was just him. Through Eusebius, quotes, it was a custom of the great cities in great crises of danger for the rulers of a city or nation, in order to avert the common ruin, to give up the most beloved of their children for sacrifice as a ransom to the avenging demons, and those who were thus given up were sacrificed with mystic rites. Kronos, then, whom all Phoenicians call Elis, who was the king of the country and subsequently, after his decease, was deified as the star Saturn, had by a nymph of the country named Anobrent an only begotten son, whom they on this account called Erdud, the only begotten being still so called by the Phoenicians, and when in very great dangers from war had beset the country, he arrayed his son in royal apparel and prepared him on his altar and sacrificed him. Now I'm just gonna say the Greeks not really into the human sacrifice, so that's already very much on shaky ground. Reported by Eusebius, in the Pareto Evangelica from Philo's account, the semi-legendary pre-Trojan War Phoenician, indicates that Kronos was originally a Canaanite ruler who founded Byblos and was then deified. This version gives another name as Elusor Ilus and states that in the 32nd year of his reign, he emasculated, slew, and deified his father, Epigeus or Allotokthon, whom they afterwards called Uranus. The Father Time is an interesting thing. There is lots of art depicting him as a kind of Greek figure like the Titan Kronos while wielding the harvest scythe, or in the 19th century, he is shown as an older man in so many places around the world. As I mentioned earlier, Grecian and Roman philosophers connect the name Kronos with Kronos. Yes, they sound very similar, but there's Kronos and Kronos with a CH or a KH rather than just a C or K, who was the god of time, or post-Renaissance Father Time. As described in the Orphic poems, the unaging Kronos, who's the one with the CH, was engendered by earth and water, producing aether and chaos, and an egg, which produced the hermaphroditic god Phanes, who gave birth to the first generation of gods. Phereclides of Syros later described Kronos, with the CH, as the ultimate creator of the cosmos, Zos or Zeus, and the Chthoni, the chthonic, joining him as the three eternal principles. The much earlier Athenian philosopher Plato, in the 400s to 300s BCE, was the earliest mention that I could find of an explanation for the direct conglomeration of Kronos with a C and Father Time. In one of his dialogues, Cratylus, Plato points out that the name Kronos, spelled in Greek with a K, means the pure and unblemished nature of his mind. This doesn't make a lot of sense until reading that, according to Plato, both Kronos, with the K or C, and his wife Rhea, or Ro, were named after streams, one of which was Kronos, with the CH. The Roman philosopher Cicero, in the 1st century BCE, was among the earliest to record this connection after Plato. He and Plutarch, in the 1st century CE, based it on the assumption that Kronos, with a C, was synonymous with Kronos with a CH, meaning time. This link was made not only via the name, but also because Kronos, with a C, was the god of harvest, which linked to the maintenance of the course and cycles of seasons and periods of time. This also connected to the name Saturn, as its implied meaning is that because he was devouring its children, Saturn, Kronos, time, also eventually devours the ages. There are, however, more modern academics who disagree with this interpretation, as H.J. Rose in 1928 and Yanda in 2010. It is only since the Renaissance that we were able to access these newer pieces of art, as during the Dark Ages there wasn't much documentation of mythological stories, whether in text or in art. According to Rose, the etymology fell short, but Yanda gave further explanation by offering an Indo-European etymology of the cutter. The root kur, to cut, could be from the Greek kovo, and korevo is the Greek word for shear. This may have been motivated by Kronos' characteristic act of cutting the sky, or the genitals of the anthropomorphic sky, Oranos. Although we typically think of Father Time as an old man, although he is going through the stages of life in a year and hits middle age around June, July, he still is not old until near the end of the year, like the ghost of Christmas Present in A Christmas Carol. However, especially in previous centuries, when typically your appearance aged faster than we see it now. So that might be throwing my opinion a little bit off. but it could still relate to the god Sol Invictus, which is Latin for unconquered sun. He was portrayed as a young conqueror, connecting with themes of death personified, at least maybe to the other cultures who got conquered. And as he was the official sun god of the later Roman Empire, he was promoted by Emperor Aurelian in 274 AD and celebrated on December 25th, which of course later connected to the date of Christmas. He represented the unconquered light, victory, and associated with soldiers and emperors with a sun crown, similar to the artwork of Jesus and the saints with the halo around their heads, although his is more pointy. And although it doesn't obviously connect with Father Time, it does sort of connect with one of the other gods that we talked about, the Canaanite El, as the son of the earth and sky. So not only their child, but also the sun burning in the sky. At least as it's been translated. The sun-sun homophone is an English thing. So Sol Invictus does connect to Kronos, but it also connects with this later El. In the original Canaanite, El was not the son of the earth and sky. Rather, he was the father god to the pantheon and was the supreme being. But as Philo of Byblos was writing centuries later, he had his own interpretation of the surviving traces of Phoenician mythology and changed it so he would be the son of the sky and the earth. This Western version of time personified Father Time first really appears in the Renaissance with a scythe and an hourglass. In some mythology, this is explained by Father Time becoming a companion of the Grim Reaper, the personification of death, and taking his scythe. You'll notice that though the scythe is one of Kronos' symbols, it is not the original tool he used to defeat his father. Almost like the myths were evolving with the changing times and technological advancement. Father Time may also have had a snake-like attribute with a tail in its mouth, also reminiscent of the Viking world serpent Jormungandr, and the Ouroboros, an ancient Egyptian symbol of eternity that brings almost all of the conglomerated gods together. Death, or the Grim Reaper, is not always shown the same way. Not all the pieces that I found had the scythe. There are a multitude of examples of death not directly from Western culture, like Hel from Scandinavia or Yama-Raja from Hinduism, that are of many different versions of reapers. But they are both gods of death and are carrying staffs. The depictions of walking skeletons is most likely the image that most of us are familiar with. As the scythe was for reaping and harvesting crops, we no longer question its appearance with the Reaper, a name given for its reaping of souls. For a time in the 12th to 13th century BCE in the Levant, death was even personified as a Canaanite god Mot, son of El. It's not a direct tie to the earlier mythological discussion, but it shows family ties and the continuation of traditions. The Angel of Death is often shown with wings and the hourglass of Father Time, and was thus an early Renaissance addition. Most Western cultures also eventually, generally, switch over to death being portrayed as the Grim Reaper, but there are examples of earlier mythology bleeding through, such as La Mort du François by Carlos Squab, or getting to the cover image for the blog and of the thumbnail, Death by Janis. This was by the Latvian painter Janis Rotalis in 1897. It's obviously far after the Renaissance, but it connects with the ancient and the modern. By now, people have moved slightly further away from the Black Plague, and death is shown as more alive, and the subjects in the painting are in a calm, wooded area. Death is shown as a female angel, or in the early mythology of Latvia, as the young woman named Giltine. The other major difference is that death in this form is holding a sickle, not a scythe. harkening back to the original Father Time and the tool he used to prevent a purveyor of death. I can't speak to the artist's ideas, but this painting seems less intimidating. A white-gowned figure with a mother and child almost invokes a sense of peace rather than fear that accompanies the unknown, especially without the large, intimidating blade looming over their heads, which often shows up as the final ghost in A Christmas Carol, the ghost of Christmas Future. The female version also plays a role in Greek mythology with Demeter, or Ceres in Latin, who is often called Chrysaros, meaning Lady of the Golden Blade, after the golden sword or sickle she is sometimes depicted with. Her position seems to almost supplant Kronos, as she was the goddess of agriculture and the harvest, and she presides over grains and the fertility of earth, while also being identified with a snake. Another connection is that although she was not often referred to as the goddess of harvest, rather the goddess of spring, she was also the goddess of sacred law and the cycle of life and death. Moving further into Western Europe, Odin was the head god and sort of trickster in Scandinavian mythology, other than Loki, constantly seeking knowledge. In one portion of his questing tales, Odin was searching for the mead of poetry, and he just got caught up with farmers harvesting out in the fields. At the beginning of this particular story was at the conclusion of the Aesir-Vanir War, where the Aesir and Vanir gods and goddesses sealed their truce by spitting into a great vat. From their spittle, they formed a being whom they named Kvasir. Kvasir was the wisest human that ever lived. None were able to present him with a question for which he didn't have a satisfying answer. Sounds more like he's a good BSer. Whatever. He became famous and traveled through the world giving counsel. Kvasir was invited to the home of two dwarves, Farlar, which meant deceiver, and Galar, which means screamer. You'd think that he would have found something a bit questionable about this, but upon his arrival, we are proven correct. The dwarves slew Kvasir and brewed mead with his blood. The mead contained Kvasir's ability to dispense wisdom and was appropriately named Ordinori, the stirrer of inspiration, and any who drank of it would become a poet or a scholar. When the gods questioned the dwarves about Kvasir's disappearance, Falar and Galar told them that Kvasir had choked on his wisdom. The two dwarves didn't hold on to the mead for very long, though, because of their taste for murder. Sometime later, they took the giant Gilling out to sea and drowned him for fun, and killed his wife because her crying annoyed them. This time, by dropping a millstone on her head as she passed under the doorway of their house. This pissed off the giant's son, Sultag, and he heads off for a little old-fashioned vengeance. But this last mischief got the dwarves into too much trouble. When Gilling's son, Suttung, meaning heavy with drink, learned of his father's murder, he seized the dwarves and at low tide carried them out to a reef that would soon be covered by the waves. The dwarves pleaded for their lives, and Suttung granted their request only when they agreed to give him the mead that they had brewed with Kvasir's blood. Suttung hid the vats of mead in a chamber beneath the mountain Hnitbjorg, which means pulsing rock, where he appointed his daughter Gunnlod, invitation to battle, to watch over the mead. Odin, the chief of the gods, who is restless and unstoppable in his pursuit of being the wisest, was angry that this precious mead was being hoarded away beneath the mountain, and he wouldn't stop until he had it for himself and those he deemed worthy of its powers. Disguised as a wandering farmhand, Odin went to the farm of Suntun's brother Bragi. There he found 9 servants mowing hay with scythes. He approached them, took out a whetstone from under his cloak, which of course he has, and offered to sharpen their scythes. They eagerly agreed and were amazed at how well their scythes cut the hay. They all declared this to be the finest whetstone they had ever seen, and each asked to purchase it. Odin consented to sell it, but he warned them, "You must pay a high price." He then threw the stone into the air, and in their scramble to catch it, the 9 killed each other with their size. Odin then went to Braugi's door and introduced himself as Bolverk, worker of misfortune, and he offered to do the work of the 9 servants who had, as he told it, baselessly killed each other in a dispute in the field earlier that day that, of course, he had nothing to do with. And as his payment, he requested just a sip of Suttung's mead. Braugi responded that he had no control over the mead, and Suttung guarded it jealously, but that if Bolverk could truly perform the work of 9 men, he would help the apparent farmhand to his desire. And this is the end of the section of the story that the size and the whetstone were even mentioned, but the story goes on from there, and it's kind of funny, so I'm going to keep going. At the end of the growing season, Odin had kept his end of the bargain to the giants, who agreed to accompany him to Suttung to inquire about the mead. Suttung, however, angrily refused, like, "No, now get the fuck out." Odin was rebuffed, but not undaunted, and comes up with a cunning plan. The disguised god, who reminded Braugi of their bargain, convinced the giant to aid him in granting access to Gunnlaug's dwelling. The two went to a part of the mountain that Braugi knew to be the nearest to the underground chamber. Odin took an auger out of his cloak, which I guess he just has a cloak of holding, and handed it to Braugi for him to drill through the rock. The giant did so, and a bit later, but not very long, Braugi said that the hole was finished. But Odin thinks that it was suspiciously fast, so he blew into the hole to verify. And when the rock just blew back into his face, he knew that his companion had lied to him. The god then told the giant to finish what he had started. When Braugi proclaimed the hole to be complete for a second time, Odin once again blew into the hole, and this time the debris was blown all the way through. He basically says, "Later, sucker," before turning into a snake and slithering through the hole. Once through, he turns himself into a charming young man and sets about seducing Gunnlaug. He won her favor and secured a promise from her that if he would sleep with her for 3 nights, he could have 3 sips of her father's mead. She agreed, and they set about doing it. After the 3rd night, Odin went to the mead, which was in 3 vats, and consumed the contents of each vat in a single draught. Knowing that he would be in huge trouble, he quickly turns into an eagle and starts flying home. Suttung, obviously, isn't too happy about his mead being stolen, so he also turns into an eagle and chases him towards Asgard. When the gods saw Odin approaching with Suttung close behind him, they set out several vessels at the rim of their fortress. Odin reached the home of his fellow gods before Suttung could catch him, who finally realizes where he's heading and wildly decides to turn around rather than deal with literally all the gods, while Odin is vomiting up the mead he drank into the vats that the other gods set up along the way. Ew. A few drops, though, fall from his beak and land on Midgard, which is where all the bad and mediocre poets and scholars come from. But the good poets get a drink from Odin personally. Yet another ew. But whether sickles or scythes were that important in this story, it still shows that the scythes were being regularly used by farmers, and the tool also appears as a grave good, proving that the Norsemen were more than raiders and pillagers. So let's move away from Western mythology now. While we were showed artwork signifying death in a previous section, they weren't all connected to sickle or scythe. So when I looked for more, I found Kamaitachi, a Japanese yokai. This weasel spirit demon has long sickles, as claws. There are a variety of local legends about these dust devil riding spirits, but most seem to agree that they inflict painless, bloodless cuts as if they appeared in the wind. In a few regions of Japan, they are evil gods, either as a single entity or as 3 separate entities. In the mountainous region of the Kochi and Tokushima prefectures, kamatachi are the tsukumomagi, a receptacle that has turned into a yokai, with the onryu, vengeful spirit, of a discarded or forgotten sickle. Meanwhile, in the east, there are legends of them as vengeful ghosts of praying mantises or beetles. With such a wide array of traits and origin legends, it's challenging to find meaning, especially as an outsider. Maybe it has something to do with caring for and respecting the world along with organisms and objects in it, because everything has its own purpose. But why don't these particular tools show up in burials when other agricultural tools do, at least as commonly? Unfortunately, I can't answer this question. At first, I thought that people didn't want to claim the power that the personification of death has, but that didn't really come into play until approximately the Renaissance, which was already after the scythe was associated with Father Time, and also after European cultures mostly stopped burying personal items with the dead, like we don't have it in modern Christianity. So while the tool isn't as closely connected to burial remains as other tools, as I cited in my master's thesis that I also put up on my website, it applies to the research in both its agricultural roots and its context for mythological power. What is most poignant is how no matter which culture it was in, the tool was adapted into a position in which its purpose of controlling nature, be it plant or human, is linked to an understanding of the nature of time and death. And of course, during this changing of years, going from 2025 to 2026, there is always a need of developing oneself and developing who we're going to be in the future. Looking at the old Father Time and Baby New Year, which will advance in age day by day, as the rest of us do. Looking at these old tools and how they were used is a remembrance of what came before and what can make us think what we still need to change, what we still need to advance. By looking at the artwork that it's used in, can show how we want things to be remembered, not just in text, but in stories. And obviously there are more rabbit holes to go deep down on, like on any of these topics, but so many of them I'll never be able to find because they are either ancient, maybe wiped away by the sands of time, or their oral history in particular cultures that aren't transported to a person living in the west coast of America. But man, I hope I can find more, because just like the White Rabbit carries his little clock and is always late, I will go deep into Wonderland and find that crazy, mad place an educational one as well. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Detours in Archaeology, Slice of Life. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like and subscribe to the podcast, to my website. Leave a 5-star review, please, and leave a comment. I highly recommend going to the website and looking at all the pictures that go along with this article, all the artifacts, all the places. There are links in the description. There's also links to my Patreon, my Blue Sky account, my Instagram, where I have multiple different things coming up every week. And on my Patreon, I have bloopers on the drawing weeks. So I hope that you will enjoy it, as I mess up a lot during these recordings. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry for all of my pronunciation, names, and just words in general. I am sorry for all the crazy pronunciation of Icelandic words. I tried. Thank you for your patience. If you know of any corrections, or you have more information, or any questions, feel free to email me directly at detoursinarchaeology@gmail.com, or you can contact me really anywhere. And I have some merch in my website store. I have a shirt that says, "Id est quod illa dixit." It means that's what she said in Latin. I also have stickers, just small random things. I am on the Archaeology Podcast Network, so if you are new and listening to this for the first time, welcome. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it if you've listened to all of my episodes already. I have received some emails from people giving me different ideas about different things to do in the future. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And I would very much like to write about some of the things that were talked about. Let me know if you want your name attributed when I do it. Otherwise, it can be anonymous. All the music is from Scott Buckley and can be found at his website at scottbuckley.com.au. For the interesting fact today, we're going to talk about how the first ball drops were designed for ship captains, not New Year's Eve. Whether at home on the couch or at a friend's house or among crowds at a bar, watching the New Year's Eve ball drop symbolizes a fresh start. But as the ball drops to mark another year gone by, it also harkens back to an era when knowing the exact time was much more difficult. Before the 20th century, timekeeping was significantly less precise. Most people noted the time due to church bells that rang out on the hour, though that system was often inaccurate. For sailors and ship captains, knowing the exact time was key for charting navigational courses, and they used a device called a chronometer to keep track of time aboard ships. That's why Robert Washlow, a captain in the British Navy, created the time ball in 1829. The raised balls were visible to ships along the British coastline, and they were manually dropped at the same time each day, allowing ships to set their chronometers to the time at their port of departure. At sea, navigators would calculate longitude based on local time, which they would determine from the angle of the sun and the time on their chronometer. Time balls emerged as a timekeeping feature throughout the world, though evidence of them is hard to find today. The U.S. naval operation in Washington, D.C. installed one in 1845, which would later help history record the precise time of Lincoln's assassination. It dropped daily through 1936. But the time ball's reign was short-lived. The devices fell out of fashion by the 1880s thanks to ability of self-winding clocks. The concept would eventually be co-opted by the New York Times in 1907, when the newspaper's formerly explosive New Year's Eve celebrations were barred from using fireworks. Organizers took a chance by looking back at the time ball's influence and decided a lighted midnight drop was the perfect way to honor the occasion. And just an extra little fact, in Denmark, they celebrate by jumping off of a couch to ring in the new year. This will come out the day after Christmas, but since time is an illusion in the ways that only humans can really come up with explaining, and we are just moving through it second by second, I want to wish everyone happy all of the holidays and all of the different sorts of New Year's that there are. Let's just make sure that we can all grow together, and stay curious, stay inspired, and keep taking those detours. Happy holidays. I already said that. Thanks again.